And we're back with another episode of Gladio for Europe. I'm Russian Sam, and I'm joined today by Halal Sam.
Hello.
And today we have a guest with us. He's most well known as Hezbolsonaro on Twitter, but his real name is Liam, and he's a prolific poster and a political commentator. And he's here today to talk to us about the 1998 film West Beirut and the Lebanese Civil War more generally.
And Beirut more generally, too.
Yeah. Hey, guys. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm on vacation right now, almost done with it. Just rewatched the movie again. It's been a year or so since I've watched this, the first time. So I just rewatched it again, and it's definitely an interesting and sad, but also very beautiful movie.
It's the same for me. I think I watched it when I was in Lebanon, and just rewatched it again yesterday. And yeah, it's definitely quite a unique film, I think. Really interesting stylistically and thematically. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what you guys think about it.
It's a great film. It's probably the most well-known movie about the Lebanese Civil War. So again, the movie is West Beirut, directed and released in 1998 by the director Ziad Doueri, who was born himself in Beirut in 1963. The movie is heavily autobiographical. The main character, Tarek, in the movie, he's supposed to be a stand-in for Ziad himself. He himself grew up in a very similar family, in a very similar situation. But yeah, Ziad left Lebanon in 1983, and he went to study in the U.S. He graduated to San Diego State University in 1986, got a degree in cinema, and he worked extensively in Hollywood, most prolifically with Quentin Tarantino as a photographer and camera assistant. This movie was his debut, released in 1998, very successful, won several awards, has been praised a lot, especially because of how realistic this movie was in depicting the realities of Lebanese life during the war in a very gritty way, very unpolished, without really idealizing the situation. Doueri himself said, during the first years of the Civil War, despite the anxiety that I could sense in my parents, I was incapable of feeling it myself. I wasn't born with fear. I acquired it. And that's really the arc of the movie itself. Throughout the movie, Tarek is just sort of this class clown who doesn't really take anything seriously. And only towards the end does it dawn on him.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. The movie really grounds you in actual events. I'm not a huge movie buff, but I've seen enough war movies that are very vague on the actual history and stuff. They tend to try to avoid actually grappling with real things. But this gets into specific events. The opening scene, Tarek and Omar are students at a French school in East Beirut, and it's very dramatized. I'm sure Well, they witnessed the Ain al-Ramane bus massacre, which kicks off the start of the Lebanese Civil War. Obviously, that wouldn't have happened. Probably you wouldn't have had kids looking out their school window seeing that. I don't know, but it's very specific. Okay, here's what happened. Gunmen massacred a bus of Palestinians.
Yeah, and they have a Kamal Jumblatt's assassination.
Yeah, that was another thing. Going to the a march or a rally or a funeral, I don't know, after Kamal Jumblatt's assassinated. But on the other hand, he messes with the timeline too, because that happens 2 full years after the Lebanese Civil War starts.
Jumblatt's assassination was 1977, right?
Yeah, it's in 1977.
But they don't really show the passage of time. If you didn't know that, it wouldn't be clear that more than a few weeks had passed, really.
Yeah, no, the only you have indications in some things, you see people start to look a little more depressed and decay, and some people change the way they dress, and some things like that, but overall the indications of time are deteriorating conditions.
Yeah, just these factors are why I hesitate to really call this a historical movie per se, because it doesn't really deal with the history itself. It has historical events like the bus massacre and the assassination of Jumblatt, but at the same time, it's more of a coming-of-age story in a war zone rather than a movie about the events of the war themselves. It's just a story of these kids growing up into adulthood and maturing as they grapple with the realities of the deteriorating situation around them.
Right, for sure. But I think what stands out to me is that it also, grounds itself in the political situation at the time. You can see in their neighborhood, Amal movement posters and stuff, and references to specific political and militia leaders. So I think it really does make an effort to establish the real political environment around the events that are being depicted, instead of just, brushing it off with a vague, like, oh, there's a war going on, there's two sides, blah, blah, blah.
No, you see clear identifications of who these people are.
Yeah.
And you see their identities kind of hardened in some ways. But actually, let's start a bit more broadly and talk about the Civil War.
I'll start with Lebanon. So Lebanon's created after World War I. It's a French mandate carved out of Ottoman territory. I mean, there had been, entities called Lebanon, Mount Lebanon, in that area for a long time. But, this is what establishes the borders of the state that we know today. When Lebanon gains its independence from France, they establish a political system under the National Pact, which divides power between the Muslims and Christians in the country. Lebanon is very religiously diverse, has a bunch of different sects. None of them are like a dominant population. So the political leaders at the time, and the international powers especially, this was 43. So you get this system of power sharing. The prime minister has to always be a Sunni Muslim. The president has to always be a Maronite Christian, and the Speaker of Parliament has to always be a Shia Muslim.
And there's a 6-5 ratio in Parliament.
Yeah, and then crucially, there's an agreement made up that Lebanon's Christians are not to seek domination of Lebanon by foreign powers, particularly France, because Christian elite, or however you want to understand it, were very Western looking. And on the other hand, Lebanon's Muslim leaders were supposed to not align Lebanon with the Arab world, not to join Syria in particular.
Yeah, which was a very popular demand in some Muslim circles.
Right, and then later on this becomes relevant when Nasser establishes the UAR, and there's people in Lebanon that want to join that as well.
The first prime minister describes the country as a, quote, a country with an Arab profile that assimilates all that is beneficial and useful in Western civilization, which is a good way of describing how the Lebanese elite perceives itself and their country. It's an insane belief, but it's what they believe.
So in the years that follow, there is, a lot of tension over this. Lebanon becomes economically prosperous off of mostly banking becomes a big industry, but a very unequal country as well. So you get Beirut developing quite a lot, becoming a hub for international finance and tourism, all the while a lot of the country is still very poor. In 1958, you have the Lebanon crisis, where basically U.S. troops end up intervening to stop kind of rebellion that comes up from these leftist Arab nationalist faction that's emerged against President Camille Chamoun, who's a right-wing Christian and is seen as very he is very pro-West, pro-France, pro-United States. So this doesn't escalate into a full-fledged civil war, but there's a small conflict that is, starting to show the tensions that have emerged. Lebanon becomes home later on to the Palestinian Liberation Organization after they're forced out of Jordan after the events of Black September. The PLO is very well trained, very highly armed, and they essentially set up shop in various parts around Lebanon, and that causes a lot of tensions. They're still launching attacks into Israel. Israel's responding. So a lot of Lebanese people are unhappy about this, particularly Christians who don't see any kind of kinship with the Palestinian cause, and many of whom would prefer to make peace with Israel. So this eventually gets us to 1975, when a group of Palestinians taking a bus back to their camp are attacked by a group of gunmen from the Kataib Party, which is a right-wing Christian group. And this was sort of presented as retaliation for some other events that had unfolded, altercations between Kataib militiamen and PLO militiamen.
Yeah, they tried to kill Pierre Gemayel, who was the head of the Kataib earlier in that day, and this attack was basically viewed as retribution against this attempt. Yeah, and Gemayel is like sort of the main guy advocating against the Palestinians, basically.
Pierre Gemayel, to be specific, because there are there's a whole family there that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So this, along with some other events around the same time, sets off the conflict. You get more back and forth attacks, and within a few months, it's basically broken out into war. A bunch of different factions on both sides take hold. You get, broadly speaking, the right-wing Christian coalition, the Lebanese forces, or the Lebanese Front, composed of Kataib and some other parties. And on the other hand, you have the PLO allied with the Lebanese National Front, which is a group of leftist, Arab nationalist mostly Muslim, but also including a lot of Christians.
The Druze too, right?
Druze, yes. When I say Muslim, I include Druze in that because Lebanon includes Druze in that, even though it's technically a separate thing.
Yeah, they're included in the seat allotments for Muslims in parliament.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the National Front the Lebanese National Front is basically concerned with reforming Lebanon. So they want more equal power sharing at the very least, if not, an abolishment of this confessional system. They want, more egalitarian economic system. So you have, socialists and communists as part of this, and they're very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause.
Of course.
Yeah, and just to go back a little bit, again, this goes back to the problem of the National Pact, which created this explicitly sectarian system within Lebanon, which itself was based on this 1932 census of the population, which the accuracy of which has itself been disputed at times. But essentially, because of this census, despite the fact that Christians were no longer a majority of the country, they held a disproportionate sway in terms of political power as well as economic power, and naturally this bred a lot of resentments.
Yeah, the Maronite Christians get the presidency, which is a very powerful executive, and also the 6 to 5. They are the 6 and the 6 to 5 in parliament. 5 for Muslims, 6 to Christians. And they have not done a census since.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's so contentious that they have not done another census since 1932, so no one really knows what the population of Lebanon is or the actual composition, because if a census were done, that would mean the resumption of civil war, essentially.
Or that's the fear, at least.
We have estimations about, the size of population based on, voting and stuff. And it's figured that, Christians are about 1/3 to 40% of the population, and Shias and Sunnis are each, a bit similar to that, a bit less, and then Druze make up the rest, whatever that is.
And also important to mention that Palestinian refugees are not counted in this.
Right. Palestinian and Syrian refugees, who make up, by many estimates, around 2 million people in a country of 7 million. Right now we're seeing the same stuff from Christian politicians in Lebanon who are worried about like a demographic threat of Syrian refugees who are overwhelmingly Sunni Muslim. And this was the same worry that they had with the Palestinians back in the 1970s, because it wasn't just the PLO, it was just Palestinian people. And so you had a big worry that, are these people going to become naturalized citizens and, upset the balance of power? So that's the concern on the part of the Christians, and the concern on the part of the Muslims is, the Christians have too much political power, too much economic power, why are we the underclass here? Which isn't to say that, all Christians were wealthy and stuff. There were plenty of poor Christians. Mount Lebanon was a poor area. But, just broadly speaking, it was a very unequal country. And still is.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And especially the South, the mostly Shia South, was, at this time, especially poor. I mean, it may be poor today, but it was especially poor then.
Yeah, and the most politically disorganized. Like, the Shiites didn't really have political representation until the Amal movement.
Well, that's not really true. The Communist Party was quite popular among Shiites for a while. Yeah, that was the main base of the Lebanese Communist Party.
Yeah, but of course they weren't being represented as Shiites. They were being represented as an economic underclass.
Well, right. And this is the issue. The war. So Amal's founded in 1974. The war comes and people get pushed more into these sectarian lines. Shiites moved towards Amal because a lot of them grew upset with the PLO's conduct during the war, because the PLO was very well established in the south, and they acted as thugs, bossing people around, stealing, whatever. So people were unhappy about that, and that sort of helped lead to the decline of the Lebanese left among the Shiites, and gives rise to more identitarian conservatism with Amal and later Hezbollah, but both of which are still calling for more wealth redistribution, more equal economics, but with a sectarian or religious overtone to it.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about sectarianism, it should be noted that we're not talking about a religious belief. We should not consider the Lebanese Civil War to have been a religious war. It's just that Lebanese society is set up on explicitly sectarian lines, which means that if you happen to be from a Muslim family, even if your family doesn't even have a Quran in the house, you are a Muslim, despite the fact that you may know nothing about the religion, which is something that's made very clear in the movie.
Yeah, think Northern Ireland in terms of how identity functions here.
This is what West Beirut deals with. Tarek and Omar are talking about the Quran, and both of them are like, yeah, I've never read it. I don't know any of that stuff.
They have the same relation to Islam that, like, a secular American Jew like me has to Judaism.
Yeah, pretty much. It's an identity, but it's not, the actual religion isn't something that plays a huge part in your life. Maybe you go to mosque sometimes, maybe you celebrate Ramadan, but like other than that, I mean, which isn't to say that plenty of people weren't devoutly religious. I mean, keep in mind this takes place in Beirut. Tarek's family is a middle class family.
Oh, very clearly, yeah. I mean, they read the French and Arabic newspapers.
Yeah, they're intellectuals. Tarek's father knows El Cid by heart. It's implied that they're leftists of some kind. Like, this is not the average Lebanese person.
No, this is like a probably petty bourge family.
But yeah, they become acutely aware of the fact that suddenly they are Muslims when the day after the bus massacre is perpetrated. They're driving Tarek to school, even though it's very clear that school is going to be closed from that point on. And they live in West Beirut, which was the more Muslim/mixed area, versus East Beirut, which is the more Christian area. And at a certain point, they hit a checkpoint, and the guy looks at their ID, sees that they're marked as Muslim, and say that you're not getting through, they're only letting Christians in.
He basically says the Christians are only letting Christians in, and those are his words, the Christians. He doesn't say, this or that party, or this or that militia.
Yeah, and I mean, this is referencing actual stuff. There were ID checkpoints, and there were massacres based on this. I mean, people were killed based on religion that was shown on their ID cards. Especially in the early days of the war, these Christian militias would stop people at checkpoints and shoot people for not being Christian. And like this kind of stuff instigated like back and forth reprisals and all of that. So you have a conflict essentially that has ideological roots, but is then acted on in a sectarian manner, just like killing people for whatever their sect is.
It's also important to point out that material conditions are deteriorating quite a bit for much of the country, especially if you are not rich, if you cannot afford a one-way ticket to Paris. Oh, it's also the family, they drink wine with dinner. A lot of their neighbors seem to drink and do other things that a devout Muslim are not supposed to do traditionally. Their reaction to the call of prayer is basically to be annoyed by it. Like, these are fairly secular people. And when May, the Christian girl, is introduced, Tarek is kind of like, why should I care that she's a Christian or has a cross necklace on her neck? And that only becomes more important, they realize why it's important later.
Well, and we're not given any indication that, like, she even gives a shit about religion either. Like, we're not shown, like, her praying or anything like that. She just wears it as a symbol of identity.
Exactly. But back into the world of the movie, the parents, they lived through the 58 crisis that's mentioned, and they lived through some big protests and a lot of things that made them think that what was happening in 75 wasn't going to be a big deal.
Yeah, for a very long time, they're just in denial, especially Tarek's father. He's just talking about how, like, it'll blow over. They'll just, like, shoot at each other for a little while, and then there will be peace, and we can all go back to normal. This has happened a bunch of times before. It's just Israel and the Palestinians using Lebanon as a battleground, yada, yada, yada. And he's just very stubborn about denying this reality because ultimately he wants to believe that there is a future in Lebanon. That's really the point of his character. Like, he feels himself to be very strongly Lebanese, very strongly Arab, and he doesn't want to go anywhere else.
Yeah, he says, I don't want to belong to any other land, or I don't belong to any other land. Of course, a lot of Lebanese people did end up leaving during the war.
I mean, it's definitely the case that a lot of people didn't think it would be a long conflict, including, the people at the top, international players and stuff. I think people weren't expecting this to drag out, certainly for 15 years. I mean, you get this with a lot of wars. People aren't expecting that they'll last so long. I mean, it was the case with the American Civil War, right? Like, this is just going to be one or two battles, and then everyone will be happy and we'll resolve all the issues. No, because like with the Lebanese Civil War, there were all these underlying issues at play in 1860s America that couldn't be resolved without this fight. And in Lebanon, the war could have gone ended fairly quickly. The PLO and the Lebanese national movement were much stronger than the Lebanese front, the Christians, and they were on their way to victory until the Syrian intervention,
which happened in 1976.
So Syria at this time is under the control of Hafez al-Assad, and Assad was basically concerned about ensuring Syrian hegemony in the region. He was not a Nasserist. He was opposed to the old UAR project, which had died, and he was concerned with Syria, not pan-Arabism, not everyone's happy together kind of thing. And so what Hafez is worried about when the PLO and the Lebanese national movement start to win is that there's going to be like a strong independent Lebanon that possibly takes a more independent course from Syria, possibly takes a more pan-Arab, Arab nationalist course that isn't in line with Syria's foreign policy. And what Hafez wants is to be able to bring these groups and bring the PLO sort of under his control and use them as his own instruments. So the Syrians intervene in 1976. They're much stronger than any of the military factions in Lebanon and sort of steamroll over everyone. They come through the Bekaa Valley and take control of a bunch of Lebanon and basically establish the boundaries of control between the different factions. They set up the lines and say, okay, we've got this, you've got that. You're not allowed to move from here. So essentially, they save the Christians from being defeated, and you end up with the Christians controlling Beirut and sort of the northern part of Mount Lebanon, the Syrians controlling the Bekaa Valley and the north, and the Lebanese national movement and the PLO controlling parts of the south. But as the war goes on, different factions get upset with the Syrians. The Christians get upset with the Syrians. They had initially thought Hafez is the savior. I think I remember some anecdote about the leaders basically viewed him as being a new crusader, saving the Christians. But eventually their interests start to clash. You get fights between the Lebanese front and the Syrian army. The Battle of Zahle is a big one, which is commemorated today by right-wing Christians as a big defeat for them. So that's one of the things that a lot of them are still mad at the Syrians for. So basically, yeah, you can't trust Hafez. He's always just looking out for himself and Syria's interests as he sees them.
He wants Syria to be a regional power, and Lebanon is his backyard.
Yeah, essentially. He wants to take it so that Israel doesn't take it as well.
Oh, they'd never do that. There's no possibility of that.
Yeah, those are the main rivals, and of course Israel had been involved really since the start of the war in a more minor aspect, but eventually does launch full-fledged invasion and occupation of the country. And
a siege of Beirut. I mean, it's a very brutal part of this war.
Yeah, but that took until 1982 to happen.
Right. The movie doesn't really touch on any of that.
It's impossible to talk about the entire Civil War in one episode because it's just such a big thing. Or in one movie.
But yeah, basically, all these international powers intervening helps draw the war out longer. I mean, people talk about the end of the war as 1990. Really, it went on until 2000 because that's when the Israelis finally withdraw from southern Lebanon. There was no civil war going on then, but there was still a war between Lebanese and Israelis that was a continuation from the old war. So I think you can consider the war to go a full 25 years basically.
I think that makes perfect sense, honestly. Yeah, because the Lebanese territory does not. You still have one of the factions that invaded in '82 occupying Lebanese territory until they're kicked out in 2000. But most of this movie doesn't take place in the south, of course. It takes place in Beirut. You spent some time there. Does the movie capture the feel of the city? Does it look like Beirut? Does it feel true to form? Yeah, I mean it's shot 20 years before I was there, so a lot of it looks different. But I mean there are definitely places I recognized, and there's one scene they go past a mural that I've been by. So you can definitely recognize the real feel of it.
Beirut's a small city. Like, you don't realize that until you're there. You could walk from one end to the other in like a couple hours.
I only realized how small Beirut is geographically last summer when that warehouse exploded, and I saw like the radius of that explosion in comparison to the city, and that's when it really dawned on me.
Yeah. So it's a lot of people packed in. I mean, the city proper is quite small, but you get outside of the city boundaries, the legal boundaries, and there's really no distinction in terms of the urban sprawl or anything like that. It just really keeps going. So I mean, a main, obviously the title of the movie is West Beirut, referencing the divide between the Christian and Muslim halves of the city, so called.
The Green Line.
Yeah. So this was an actual thing. The Green Line running down the middle of the city. This was the line of demarcation. It was called the Green Line because no one was going through there. The vegetation gets so overgrown. You have snipers on both sides. And like this, you can cross through there just fine today. But like it's along like a major road, so you can see very clearly. You can walk down it and see clearly. This is how the halves are divided. I mean, it's in terms of religion or affluence or anything, it's not clearly divided or anything. It's not as if people have stayed on those sides or anything. There's been a lot of mixing, but broadly speaking, I mean, there's parts of East Beirut like Ashrafiyeh and Jamaizeh and Mar Mikhail that are noticeably wealthier. These are where a lot of tourists will go and stay, and you can cross over to on the other side in the west. There are neighborhoods that are noticeably poorer, people living in sort of more dilapidated apartment buildings and stuff, a bit more rundown. So you can definitely notice a difference in living conditions from neighborhood to neighborhood.
That makes sense. Let's go back to the movie a bit.
Yeah, so again, Tarek is a very fun character. He's just the class clown. And at one point there's this scene where he's being made to read El Cid by his father. And he's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. There's a war. Why are you making me do this? And so his father is like, all right, well, maybe you want to study some Arab history. And he's just joking around saying, Arab history? God damn the Arabs. Why is that? The Arabs are scum. You're Arab yourself. Me? No, I'm Lebanese. I'm Phoenician. Phoenician? Where'd you learn that word? In Arab history class. Liam, you want to maybe tell the audience what Phoenicianism is?
Well, I mean, it's sort of a kind of revisionist narrative of history promoted by some Christians in Lebanon that says, we're not Arab, we are Phoenician, which references the ancient civilization that lived in that area a long time ago. And of course, I mean, this is nonsense. You go through thousands of years of different people, different migrations, different empires conquering you and whatever. And there's so much interbreeding or whatever. It's crazy to try to say that you are exclusively, something that far in the past and you're not Arab. I mean, there's really no genetic difference between Christians and Muslims in Lebanon.
Although there were people in the Civil War who tried to claim that, like that was part of the official ideology of, I think, Lebanese forces.
Yeah, I mean the Kataib has promoted this, and you still get promotion of that. It's an attempt to distinguish themselves from the Muslim world around them that they feel threatened by.
Yeah, like, I've seen a clip from some daytime talk show in Lebanon where they just have this guy on who insists that they're not speaking Arabic, they're speaking Phoenician. And he's just, giving proof by talking about, the different words that they use that have roots in Aramaic. So, zaleme, for example, because they say zaleme, which is, the Aramaic word for man, which has been adopted into Levantine. But yeah, it's just a very jarring experience to hear this man speaking in Arabic. Granted, it's the Lebanese dialect of Arabic, but it's Arabic nonetheless. You understand him completely, and he's just insisting that he's not speaking Arabic.
Well, and Phoenicianism isn't the only identitarian issue that comes up in the 20th century. You have Syrian nationalism, which is pioneered by Antun Sadeh, which says, everyone in the basically the Levant area, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq, some of the surrounding areas. These people are Syrian. They're not Arab. They're they're Syrian, a unique identity to that region, and he distinguishes them from the people on the Arabian Peninsula who they see as, inferior Bedouin. Bedouin gets used as an insult in West Beirut. We see that.
Yes, it does.
So yeah, there's all sorts of attempts to distinguish themselves, which is understandable. Obviously, there are cultural differences, but when it gets down to weird racial stuff, then it's a bit more questionable.
Yeah. As you said, it's certainly not the only instance of this kind of thing in the 20th century. You have, Zionism itself. You have the Canaanists within the Zionist movement. You have the SSNP, as you mentioned, who still believe some of this stuff.
In Egypt, you had the Pharaonists who were trying to connect to the ancient Egyptian identity rather than the Arab identity, which was a very strong ideology in Egypt prior to Nasser coming to power and really bringing Arab nationalism to the fore. Yeah, and then in Iraq, Saddam Hussein until the 90s even was talking about this Mesopotamianism, about how the Iraqi people are the Akkadians of yore, that this is the site of the world's first civilizations.
Well, in Iraq it predated Saddam as well. Like Abdul Karim Qasim, who was the socialist leader before the Baathists came to power in Iraq.
He's the one who got couped.
Yeah, his project was he created a flag for Iraq that used Mesopotamian imagery and tried to include Arabs, Kurds, and Assyrians as all part of this one nation. So he wasn't an Arab nationalist and got into a lot of conflict with them. And he tried to promote this separate Iraqi identity that was more inclusive of people of other ethnic groups inside the country.
I think there's another element to the whole Phoenicianism thing and the attempt to distance themselves from other Arabs in the Arab world, which is something that the father hits on in the movie at one point. He says that the world's abandoned us, but he also mentions that the Arabs have abandoned us. And there is kind of a sense of, well, what have they done for us lately?
I wondered how autobiographical Douairi is making these parts of the film, because it did strike me as sort of so this kid goes to a French school, a presumably Christian school, and so it struck me as a little bit weird that he would be talking about Phoenicianism. So I wonder if this was something the director personally experienced. That was the mindset that he was exposed to, that we're not Arab, whatever. Because a lot of Muslims did very strongly identify with Arab identity. So yeah, maybe this is him being a more sheltered middle class kid or something like that. That he's not.
Well, no. In the movie, he's very clearly joking. He's just trying to rile his father up.
You think? I didn't get that read, but I don't know.
I think he was kind of half joking.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'd have to watch it again. But I would just say, one thing that really strikes me about Tarek is how sheltered he is, how sort of unaware he is of the events. To go back to the Kamal Jumblat thing, they enter this parade, protest, whatever, and they somehow don't know who Kamal Jumblat is, even though he's he's one of the most famous people in the country. He is the main leader of the militia group representing their sect, and it's not as if it's you can see other young people in the crowd too. So it's what are these guys doing that they don't know who that is? It's sort of interesting what it's trying to tell us there about his non-awareness of the political events going on around him.
Yeah, he's still a child, and he's still very much acting like a child, and his innocence is still... I watched the movie again with my girlfriend, and they said the fact that innocence persists in this war, the kids kind of keep being innocent, at least on some level.
Yeah, but just to push back a little bit on that, I get the sense that Tarek himself is quite politically aware. So the movie begins with the children of the school in the schoolyard as they're being rounded up to sing the Marseillaise like before classes start, and he basically disrupts this by getting a loudspeaker and singing the national anthem of Lebanon instead to disrupt this, which gets him chastised by his teacher, and he's just making fun of the French language, he's purposely misspelling what the teacher is telling him to write on the board. At one point, she's asking him if he's making fun of France, and he's just no, yes, no, wait, no, maybe.
He spells Monsieur as Meeseux.
He spells Monsieur as Meilleux, he says my eyes. But yeah, he's definitely... I think he's definitely got opinions about about that stuff. But he still is not conscious about everything surrounding the war that's going on around him.
Yeah, he's aware that he doesn't like the French, but he doesn't really know where he stands within Lebanese society itself.
But then we see him. There's the militiaman in his neighborhood that he has a lot of respect for, who later turns out to be a thug.
Yeah, Papa Snake, who starts out as kind of harmless-ish, like a little bit eccentric weirdo, and by the end of it, he's bayoneting bags of grain so that no one else can get them.
Right. So we see he thinks, oh, that guy's macho, he's cool, he's got a bazooka, he's totally unaware about, the leaders of the faction. He knows Arafat and Gemayel or whatever, but he doesn't really know what's going on. And yeah, it's like you said, sort of this innocence, this sheltered middle class life that he had starts to crumble down around him as the war goes on.
The war kind of starts encroaching on his little world.
Yeah, until by the end of the movie, it becomes very clear to him what a serious situation it is. Just going back, I would like to read the speech that the teacher gives after she kicks Tarek out of the French class, because I feel like it's a good exposition of the traditional French interpretation of Lebanon, which in some ways continues to persist, and which really colored the choice of the Maronites to identify themselves as Phoenicians rather than Arabs.
Some Maronites, to be clear.
So she says, ladies and gentlemen, the French High School of Beirut is the embodiment of the French mission. Let us not forget that France created your country, created your borders, and taught you peace. We created your civilization and your constitution. Let it be known that education, especially French education, is the only way out of your primitive customs.
Yeah, it's pretty just like dripping with racism and contempt, and that is very much what they think. Yeah.
But yeah, this was the traditional high-minded French mindset that basically saw themselves as the saviors of Lebanon because they basically took a very active role in Lebanon itself in the aftermath of the war that happened in Mount Lebanon in the 1850s and the 1860s when the Druze and the Maronites began to kill each other.
It was sort of like a Christian peasant revolt against Druze feudal lords, culminated in a massacre, basically.
This was when it was still under Ottoman authority, to be clear.
Yeah, so this was a conflict that sprawled from Mount Lebanon into modern day Syria, and it's sort of like one of the early sectarian conflicts, I guess.
Yeah, and this culminated in the creation of the Mutasarrifiyya of Mount Lebanon, which was sort of this autonomous zone where France had an inordinate amount of influence that they basically forced the Ottoman government to hand over to them under the pretext of their mission of protecting the Catholic Christians of the Ottoman Empire.
It's basically like Sidon to like Tripoli, or a little below Tripoli, actually.
Yeah, and what became Lebanon later was actually called Greater Lebanon.
Greater Lebanon includes like the Bekaa Valley, the south, a little bit more of the far north.
One thing I wanted to note, Christ, I can't remember the guy's name. Lebanese National Movement includes one of the Christian peasant leaders of the uprising against the feudal lords in their imagery. Like they use his image on posters and stuff. So it's interesting. You get like nominally Muslim movement using a Christian leader as a...
Well, they're not nominally Muslim. That's the thing. They're nominally non-sectarian. It's just that the majority of their supporters are Muslim because of the way that Lebanese society was structured.
Right. But yeah, no, I mean to say this movement that's identified with Muslims, they use a Christian leader because, they see him as a revolutionary, as someone standing up against injustice.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, yeah, like this stuff is not all just purely like, these people are all still part of one country.
Tanyas Shaheen, the name of the guy, sorry.
Basically, in the movie, what happens is that Tarek and Omar are marching in this procession to commemorate Kamal Jumblat, who was the leader of the
Progressive Socialist Party.
Yeah, the Progressive Socialist Party, which was Druze-aligned and a big part of the Lebanese national movement. And at a certain point, this march is interrupted by a guy throwing a Molotov cocktail. This isn't said, but I was under the impression that the guy doing that would have been Syrian-aligned.
I don't think that was a real event. I don't know don't know what they're trying to do with that thing. The Syrians were probably the people that killed Kamal Jumblat. Hafez got frustrated with him after a while. You know, he was trying to maintain the independence of the leftist movement from the Syrian government, and so in 1977 he was assassinated by some gunmen that came up on his car and killed him and his driver and bodyguard. The car that the assassins were in had Iraqi plates, I think, which doesn't really make any sense, and so people think that probably it was like a lazy attempt to frame the Iraqis for it. You know, most people agree that it was probably the Syrians that did it, because you know, they wanted to knock off this upstart, and it worked for them, because when Kamal's son Walid Jumblat takes over the party, he becomes much more easy to work with for the Syrians, and sort of drops the ideological aspect of the PSP and turns it into more of a just Druze interests focused party. But as for this attack on the procession, yeah, I've no idea what that was about or what they're trying to indicate there. I mean, maybe it's just supposed to be a plot device. I don't know.
Either way, it gets us to Walid's place.
Yeah, so Tarek, he ducks into the backseat of this taxi after this procession is attacked, and the driver is driving to this place. He has no idea where he's going, but at a certain point he realizes that he had crossed into the eastern half of the city, and lo and behold, he's suddenly in a brothel with a bunch of prostitutes just dancing around him, and he's like a 15-year-old boy, so he can't really contain his joy all that well. And he meets the infamous Walid.
The madam, the owner of the brothel, and a figure of some note across the city. She claims that her brothel is the only one like it in the city, which I highly doubt, and in any city of that size, and claims that in the brothel there is no East or West Beirut, and the war doesn't really matter here.
Yeah, and I've seen references made to the fact that she's based on a real personality, but I wasn't able to figure out who the real person was.
Those people don't always get recorded in respectable histories.
The taxi has a bra hanging on its roof, so the snipers know not to shoot, because there's an agreement that people can come to the brothel at will without getting shot.
Presumably the soldiers are going themselves. Well, no, actually, that's confirmed later on, yeah. And this is kind of a bit of an escape for Tarek. It's a place where he can kind of pretend that, you know, things are normal again and that he's having a fun teenage boy experience, etc. His plan is to end the war by having Arafat and Jamael and everyone else just meet in the brothel and just, you know, it'll all be okay. They'll have something that unites them. But
at this point, Walid, she's very angry because the night before, an actual fight had broken out in the brothel, because it turned out that one of the girls was sleeping with both Christians and Muslims, and she's just flabbergasted.
Yeah, she's very dismayed at this and says she's finished, that Beirut is finished, that everything's fucked, basically. Liam, what was your take on this?
I don't know. I didn't really know what to make of it. It's interesting that, you know, it's sort of seen as the kind of the neutral ground or whatever. You know, soldiers from both camps can go there to get their rocks off. I don't know. It's hard to tell, for me at least, like why the film places such a big emphasis on this, because it's sort of after this that Tarek like starts to mature, I guess, and become more aware of the realities of the war, I guess.
Yeah, this is when it sets in really for him. It's kind of it's the last place that he can go to escape everything, it seems like. Because his father is clearly receding into a lot of despair. The mother is clearly very desperate as well. Her job appears to be gone. The courthouse is closed. It doesn't really seem to be much waiting for them. The father, you hear him and the mother discussing, you know, they call them deluxe refugees and terms that I will not repeat. Essentially what he's saying is, look, I don't want to sell falafel in New York or drive a cab in Paris. There's no point in leaving. Then the mother, who wants to leave in much of the movie, eventually acquiesces because they realize that there really is nowhere else for them. And the reality of what this is has kind of set in. We're presumably, like, if the timeline is the same as, you know, the real world, then this is probably 1977 after Jumblat's assassination. So it's taken a while for this to really set in. Like, at the start, he says that, it'll be just like 58. The father, I mean, this will be just like 1958. They'll, you know, some troops will come in, it'll all be sorted out. And that's not what happened at all. It kind of just, life goes on, even as the war gets worse and, you know, the conditions deteriorate rapidly. People still go to work and, walk around the city and do things and try to live their lives.
Yeah, life finds a way.
Which is something we see in Lebanon today as the situation there deteriorates, well, kind of different in kind of similar-ish ways.
The economic crisis today is worse than the economy was during the war.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, I've seen people make reference to the fact that they were living better during the Civil War because they could still import stuff. Their money was still worth something. But now, the financial system is just totally wrecked.
Which is what, was one of the big attractions of Lebanon, was the banking system of the country. And even that's disintegrated at this point.
Yeah, from what I understand, what had happened was that Lebanon had managed to see a lot of GDP growth on paper because their central bank mandated that interest rates be set very high so that people to hold their money in Lebanese banks gets crazy rates. At one point, it was 10% a year, which created a lot of incentives for people outside of Lebanon itself to bring their money over to Lebanon. And
a lot of Syrians in particular, for example, a lot of other people in the region.
At a certain point, the Lebanese central bank had to start liquidating its dollar reserves to keep up with the interest payments. And so they just totally ran out of dollars, out of euros, out of all that stuff. And
they just kept kicking the can down the road until there was no road left.
The lira value has been fluctuating. I mean, it got really bad after recently Saad Hariri said that he's stepping down. He's not trying to form a government. I think it rebounded a bit. So it's somewhere between 15 and 20,000 lira to the dollar, which is 10 times what it was, or a tenth of the value that it was prior to this crisis. Yeah, no, it's been massive inflation. Lebanon's problem is, this system of this rentier economy, basically, that sustained it for so long. Now, when this crisis comes, has left it without any productive sectors, without anything to rely on. So, when you need to import everything and your currency is totally devalued, that's not good. So really it's the result of these policies set up by politicians, over the decades since the country was started, exacerbated by the anti-worker, anti-industry policies of Rafiq Hariri in the 1990s. And yeah, here we are today. That's all led to total ruin. It's the neoliberal libertarian dream, Lebanon. I mean,
everything's privatized.
Yeah, this was what they wanted. This is what libertarians want, basically, is the Lebanese system. All this free commerce, all this opportunity for, banking and stuff, and,
And the state not existing for all intents and purposes.
Everything is privatized. Everything is up for grabs. It's pretty hellish in a lot of ways. You can view Lebanese political and economic history in a lot of ways as just kicking the can down the road constantly. The agreement to end the Civil War, essentially, just kicked the can down the road.
Oh, well, the agreement to end the Civil War was supposed to end the sectarian system. I mean, the Taif Accord said we've got to, put an end to this. But yeah, it's just kicking the can down the road more.
Yeah, they didn't actually lay out any concrete way to do that.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on, Liam, to talk to us about West Beirut and the Lebanese Civil War more generally. I'm Russian Sam, and
I'm Paul Sam.
I'm Liam.
You can follow Liam at Hezbolsonaro on Twitter.
And is there anything else you would like to plug, Liam?
Subscribe to my Substack. It's in my Twitter bio. Write about international politics, whether it's Lebanon or Latin America or wherever. So yeah, if you're into that kind of thing, consider giving it a try.
Sounds good. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks guys.
All right, take care.